Medium, sublist sum. Given a list of integers nums, determine whether there is a sublist such that its sum is strictly larger than the total sum of the list. In the first example, we have a list called nums with the values 1, -2, 3, 4. The output is true because the total sum of the list, if you add 1 plus -2 plus 3 plus 4, is 6, and the sum of the sublist, specifically 3 and 4, is 7, which is strictly larger. In the second example, the list only contains -2. The output is true because if we decide to only choose the empty sublist without containing anything, the value would be 0, and that would be larger than the sum of the list, which is -2. One way we can do this is by iterating through the list and counting each element. Because this is saying strictly larger, we cannot sort the list. So what we can do is by iterating through the list and counting each element. As soon as the total sum is larger than the total sum of the list, we can return true, because that means that there is a part of a list which is larger, which would be that part. Another thing to note is that if the sum goes less than 0, we can put the total sum as 0, because then that means we chose not to count any of the past variables. So let's do an example. Here we have a list which sum is 10. It starts off and the first value, which is -3. Since our counter is at 0, and if we add -3 to it, it's going to be less than 0. So we decide to keep it at 0 instead of -3. The next value is 1, which we add because 1 plus 0 would be greater than 0. And next is -2. If we add, it will be -1. So instead of going to -1, we're going to just keep it at 0 and not count it as part of that. Next is 4. We add it because it's greater than 0. So 0 plus 4 is 4, meaning that our counter value is not 4. Then we have 5, make it 9. Then we have 6. If we add it, our counter becomes 15, which is greater than the sum of the list. But if that weren't to happen, let's say that we iterated through the rest, it would return false if it finished. So to put this into practice, we can start by getting the sum of the list through sum and also initialize a counter. Next, as we said earlier, we're going to iterate through every element in nums and add the value to counter. If the counter is greater than 0, we're going to check if it's greater than the sum of the list, which at that point we could return true, meaning that there is a sublist strictly larger that is larger than the sum. Otherwise, if it's not, we can set it to 0 and ignore the previous sublist. And if the whole thing runs without finding a sublist that's greater than the sum, then we can return false. So let's run it. It looks like that the program iterated through the whole list and no value is greater than the sum. It did not know to take nothing, which the value of the nothing would be 0, which would be greater than -2 in this case. So let's add that real quick. We check if the sum is less than 0. If it is, return true, because in the empty list where the sum of 0 will be greater than whatever negative sum of the list is. So let's do it again. It works. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe.